There's a gamut of media, new experts and influencers claiming that AI is radically reshaping organizations, markets, roles, and businesses. And decrying your response to this is the needs that this is all contained within a digital transformation project. That's wrong at best, deceitful at worst. Most of the online content bombarding people is selling a dream or utopia, which may or may not exist. And there isn't enough content out there about human behavioral change that is required to actually enable AI to achieve its full potential. Today, expert CPO Brian Parkes and I will try and put some sense and sensibility around AI and describe how AI is less of a technology issue and more of a leadership and a behavioral issue. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you for having me, Kieran. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, let's dive in. We'll make no one wait. Brian, why do so many executives respond to AI with fear over control and what it does? What does that cost an actual organization?
Yeah. Start with a big question. So, I think the main thing I see is, it's a phrase you'll know, imposter syndrome, fear of failure. I think a lot of senior executives, realize that time frames are shorter. Forecasting is getting harder to do, as we know. AI is probably injecting steroids into that perfect storm. It's tough and unforgiving at the top of corporate life, and I think people don't want to fail. I think that is one human reality that I see. If you think about how these ladies and gentlemen are paid, there's a big bias towards action and speed and delivery and quarterly updates to analysts. The hamster wheel is constant that they're on. But if you go on to the right side of the brain, the bit that's not task focused and the bit that's more interested in creativity, emotion, and fear, which is where it comes in. We fear things that we don't understand, and I think the people I coach will say that to me once we establish rapport, which is that they're afraid of AI. They don't really understand it. They're getting bombarded with lots of promises that it will transform their lives, but they just don't know where to start. And like last week, the week before, MIT, which you'll know reminded us that about 90% of the AI implementations are failing. So that doesn't make people feel confident. So I think that the fear of messing up is a definite reason why leaders kind of avoid it or don't want to be associated with something that they think will fail. I find that people at the same time haven't read any case studies that are applicable to their sector or to their challenges. So I'm not sure how much people are helping themselves yet to kind of know where to even start with AI. So I think there's a fear of failure. There's the right brain fear. A lot of executives don't want to delegate work to humans, never mind synthetic workers, right? In terms of what it costs, it's hard to put a number on the commercials. Every company is different, but I do say to people that if they're not driving AI literacy and developing AI literacy in their organizations, their best people who probably are AI literate are probably going to walk and work somewhere else, right? And like, why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they work with like-minded people who want to use tools to improve, their outputs? So I think there's an impact on talent, which will cost organizations, because when you should be building AI literacy, it could be actually declining, and that's the one way ticket to irrelevance, for any organization, and that's not a good place to be.
No, it's a bit of digital Darwinism, isn't it? Or the definition of it. Someone said to me as well, it's interesting that leadership is lonely as well. So not only can't they do it currently, but they don't like admitting it either, and imposter syndrome jumps in. Well, what was it that first convinced you that AI is less of a technology issue and more of a leadership and a behavioral issue?
So I definitely think I've seen repeatedly that there's an absolute disconnect between the C-level execs that I'm coaching, who they like to talk about being custodians of an organization's health, of its capacity, of its profit, which is right. But you do some digging, one or two layers down the org chart, and you find a whole other tranche of people who are going, look, I'm struggling to do my job as it is. Now, with all of this new AI stuff coming in, it kind of feels to me like I have to learn to do a second job on top of the job that I'm struggling to do. And I think that is part of the problem. And there is a gap which needs to be bridged between what the C-level executives would like to see in terms of desired outcomes and the messier reality of where the organization actually is. But it's just good change management. And I think that bridge, or that gap, needs to be bridged. In terms of the behavioral piece, I would do individual coaching. I also probably do more team coaching when we were talking about AI broadly, because my understanding, I'm not an AI or digital transformation expert, and I deal with the people who are trying to deal with that stuff. And I think it's important to be able to address both. But I do see AI will require much more of a shared responsibility at executive level. And I think this is kind of at the heart of the issue, Kieran, that a lot of executives have been promoted. They're very, very successful. They're very well paid, and that happens on this quarterly cycle of delivering results to external analysts, and it's a hamster wheel that they're on. So, and remuneration is also based on individual performance and attainment. And with AI, I think AI is not a respecter. Automation is not a respecter of functional silos. By its very nature, it wants to cut across the enterprise. And I think the senior executives behaviorally could be better. Some are excellent already, of course, but I think it's quite mixed in terms of the level of sophistication at the C level, with this sense of shared ownership to the corporate mission. They say they do it, but when you get into, but actually, are you accountable for your colleagues' success? I don't think they're there yet. And again, AI is just going to inject steroids into that. I think it's a problem.
Yeah, faster crap, I think, is the phrase that I've used several times, not anything else. And again, it's interesting going back to the MIT study that was being mentioned. You'll not get real value from any level of AI or automation inside of a particular task. You need to work across workflows, which is what you're describing. But again, it opens up the question about organizational structure and rewards, regardless of AI, never mind anything else. But Brian, most people online, let's be transparent, are content bombarding people, selling a dream or a utopia, which may or may not exist. AI does offer a tremendous amount, but there isn't a lot of content, out there about human behavioral change required to enable AI. It all comes from a tech perspective. So how do we get human potential to reach its full potential? What is that? How does that conversation or narrative need to change or even begin?
I think we're at a certain age in life where, we remember when we were younger, that wave of big kind of ERP implementations, SAP, Oracle, and other platforms exist. And I think it's possibly one of the reasons we're falling into this trap is a lot of the big tier one consulting houses who tend to be the ones selling this myth. I think treat AI the way they treated previous big ERP implementations. They treat them as a tech implementation, and actually, I'm not sure whether their model is to say, well, let's get the tech implemented, then let's get it configured, and then let's deal with all the people stuff, because actually that's quite a cool business model. Now, lots of very good consulting houses do exist, but I think that's part of the problem, that if you're afraid of something, you may go to your audit firm, or you may go to one of these big six, big seven houses because you trust them. But I think there's a danger there that people will stop seeing AI as a tech implementation, or else you would make the same mistakes as our bosses did 15 years ago, where you have new tech with the same rubbish, same problems. I would get back to this, this shared ownership of corporate, the shared purpose, or the smaller tech firms talk about mission. But the whole kind of, what's the point of us being here? Like, what are we trying to achieve that wouldn't be achieved if we weren't here? The chief people officers, CPOs, are one of the few executives, I think, which are in that intersection of, their mandate is quite open. They're interested in organization-wide capability and organizational success. Yes, they are guilty of having pet projects as well. But I think the CPO is in a really good position and intersection to kind of grab that, let's drive alignment around common purpose and mission, because if they don't do it, other people will. The IT function now is like, well, HR and IT merged, and next month it'll be something else. But I would say to CPOs, grab that initiative, because you're actually really well positioned inside organizations to develop it before somebody else does.
Yeah, I always I would agree entirely, subject to the CPO not being a process monkey. And by that, I mean, process for process sake, compliance for compliance sake. And as odd as it seems, I've seen that recent move, let's get the CHRO to own the IT team. I think those are two different skills altogether. And it may be an admission that maybe HR has fallen slightly behind from a technical perspective. And the answer isn't just to smash two departments together. That doesn't feel like the right approach. And that people strategy, business strategy, and tech strategy are the three legs of a stool that I absolutely adore. One missing and the stool falls over. So we live in interesting times. Let's see if CHRO IT, and there must be a bigger initial than that, is actually going to fix it. I'm a bit like yourself. I don't think so. This needs more than tech. It not only needs tech, Brian, but AI requires what I would call a decentralized decision-making approach. It's agility. It's about speed. But the organizations that I see who are struggling with this are wired for hierarchy and caution. How do leaders resolve the tension between the need to lead, and whatever that means, and the need for speed?
I think being really honest from a coaching and a developmental perspective, I've spent 20 years doing this, and sometimes you just need to skip a layer and go further down the organization and find people who are more inclined to understand the need to collaborate. I think you could levy a similar question to the main board of directors about why do you maintain a C-suite that isn't collaborating, and we're into the pressures of the commercial pressures. So there's probably one of the main reasons why I'm getting asked to be coached at the moment is this drive to collaborate. You can design a synthetic worker, as which it doesn't care about pet projects. It's designed to collaborate with other departments. It will cut through bias and politics. And we all have good relationships and less good relationships with people at work. In reality, and your synthetic workers, which I suppose is how I understand it, are more able to cut through that than human workers. And I think that also applies at the executive level. I'm not advocating replacing C-level executives with synthetic workers, but we may be talking about that in a couple of years' time. But I think that the need to drive collaboration, what I am saying to people is, look, talk about reverse mentoring. It doesn't cost any money to do reverse mentoring. Executive coaching or external experts charge money, but putting in reverse mentoring programs, which I've done quite successfully, allows the senior execs in a very unthreatening way to kind of learn from the people in their team who are already using AI, but who may not want to admit they're using AI. It allows that conversation to start. And with most things, I try and avoid the word transformation. I'm much more into continual iterative changes, small changes, momentum going in the right direction. And eventually you may find that you've transformed something. But start small, experiment, build the right coalition internally with the right people. I think more importantly, partner with the right externals, people who understand your business, which may or may not be the big tier one consulting houses. And I think that's a really important decision, which may require a bit of bravery with senior executives, is to go with maybe smaller firms who have the experience, the battle scars, and they know what's going to work. And they're quite happy to do, I can do that in 3 months. I'm not going to spend 18 months doing it because I know I can solve this problem for you in 6 months. And I think that's the difference. I guess a lot of those roads lead to trust. So that's how do you help people who are fearful of their jobs be more trusting of a technology that they don't understand? I think just go to the people who are already using it internally and let them help you.
I think that's easy. You just bring me in and I'll teach you how to use it. It's interesting as well. I've actually built an agentic board. The idea is that each of the agents have been built with the best expert knowledge in the world that can be fed into those. But the one thing is, it doesn't replace a human board. This is augmentation, not replacement. Well, what's the one leadership behavior you see as the biggest barrier to AI adoption, and what can we do about
it? So I see that as more of a cultural issue, first of all, rather than which drives behavior. But if you're in a company with heavy bureaucracy and decision-making governance, it's just really slow and very low levels of trust, then like implementing AI is going to be very, very difficult. If your C-suite members, and some people I work with, there's a whole range of people. But if the C-level exec is insecure, if they have low trust, if they don't like delegating work without micromanaging, if they haven't got leverage with their peers, I think a lot of that stuff will drive them to resist being involved with something like AI because they don't understand it and they will feel exposed by it. So trust is important. Again, Kieran, I would get back to collective leadership teams. This kind of collective ownership, in my experience, is what's going to accelerate or stifle, AI adoption. And I think we're seeing that being played out now in real time. So trust is the short answer.
Lots struggle with that. So if you're in a room, let's imagine with 10, CEOs or C-suite members paralyzed by fear, what are you going to say to shift their mindset?
Oh, so many things come to mind, Kieran.
Violence can't be one of them, by the way.
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say to them is not all of you, but I would suspect most of them, if they're chief executives, will be old enough to have experienced the impact of the internet. And how that impacted people's home lives, how it impacted work, how it impacted commerce, online retail, etc., etc. And I guess I would probably ask them to reflect on, how if they can remember back then, how that made them feel, like how exciting it was. It was a time for pioneers, a lot of tech advancement then. And I think that storytelling thing. Can getting people to remember and recall how they felt about something that was very exciting can make them a bit more likely to respond favorably to my next question, which is, look, your job as C-suite is to find those people inside your organization and externally who can help you preside over the impact of AI on your business, because it's going to be 10 times faster than the internet. Because other people will probably know more about it than you will, and that's okay. So I think that's the first thing. Remember how you felt when you had instant access to the internet rather than dial-up, and all of that stuff. I think a lot of these guys and ladies will be that age. If they responded well to that, I would probably then say to them, how many use cases have you read which are directly relevant to your sector? And have you digested those with your team? And do you have an action plan to implement relevant solutions into your business? There's normally quite a long, awkward pause at that second question. But yeah, I'd start with a nice question as a coach about how did it make you feel, and then I would ask them what have they done about it so far, and when are they going to start?
Yeah, because this is the interesting bit for me. The competition genuinely is. We hear that a lot about tech. Like, with respect, I was never going to get a headset that weighed the same amount as a small poodle that I could see cartoon bodies with. And AI is an 85-year-old overnight success story, So this ain't new, which is the other thing as well. And now you're starting to see a lot of millennials, actually going into leadership roles. And I don't think you or I have ever been frightened of someone being better than us. I think you and I have always surrounded ourselves with people who know things that we don't, because if we just have the same ingredient in the cake, it isn't going to be the most interesting, whereas combined together, we make a much better business. Now, if that C-suite or we have to coach a board tomorrow, Brian, what 3 questions should the board ask themselves before signing off another AI initiative that's now going to be brought by this C-suite or this executive team within a business?
Yeah, I think the role of the board, as the main board of directors, I think is slightly different, just given the responsibilities that being a board director comes with, or an executive director comes with. So, I think the first question I would ask them to consider would be, what specific problem will this initiative solve, and how does that align with the corporate mission? So, is this going to be relevant, or is it a pet project? And I would stick on that one for a while. So, what's the problem you're trying to solve? With the board and maybe the chief financial officer or people involved in investor relations, I'd probably ask them to think about, there are lots of analysts commenting on your business. Some of them are more important than others. What are the important analysts criticizing you about? What are their concerns about stock and the valuation of your company? And how can this AI project address the concerns that those analysts may be identifying? Which I think lifts up to, let's look outside the organization rather than looking down. And then as a board member, they obviously have ethical and risk responsibilities about doing this stuff properly, utilizing it, which may or may not reduce the number of human workers that the company will need, but doing so ethically and using AI in an ethical way. I think for me that covers the board of directors' responsibility, without forgetting, you need to help your chief executive and her direct reports understand that this will come from collective responsibility.
Yeah, their job, maximize shareholder value, doesn't necessarily have to be about burning staff. It's that combination. I would find it very strange if a board today wasn't, trying to understand themselves, AI, automation, data, insight-driven businesses, agility, all the things that make a modern organization successful. But they do need convinced, obviously. Last question, Brian. If leaders remember one principle to guide their approach to AI, what should it be?
A big technique in coaching, or indeed therapy, is reframing. So reframe how you see AI. Would be the first thing I would say to people. See it as your friend, like the internet. You need to see. 20 years ago, people had to see the people who saw the internet as their friend were the people who did well at home and at work. So I'd say, reframe it, see it as a relationship, get to know it. And like any relationship at first, Kieran, it may be awkward at first, but the more you get to know each other, you may even get along.
You've seen me dancing. Obviously, hence the comment. Yeah, it's interesting for me. You know what I mean? We got through the internet successfully. When we resisted it, it still came. We managed to get email working. Guess what? It resisted it. It still came. Name the technology that's truly worked. and AI truly works. And resisting it is probably not the best strategy. Respecting it, questioning it, of course, and to your point, understanding the value, how it fits, where the people are, that's those leaders who will succeed. But practicing the human equivalent of digital Darwinism by sticking your head in the sand and hoping that AI will go away, or thinking that a synthetic worker will replace your human workers and all of the intricacies and problems and layering of management, rewards and communications and everything else, won't work in this space. Brian, thank you so much indeed. Exciting to get to hear you today talk about the human side. And if we combine HI, human intelligence, with AI, artificial intelligence, I think we could actually do something exciting and work. And sometimes, as I was saying to you pre-broadcast, as we were communicating, I wonder if we spend as much time getting excited about our people, spending as much time investing in them, as much time thinking forward about them and talking about them, might we actually do that a little bit better? That said, we now have the choice. Invest in great people, invest in great technology, and we can do even greater things. Thank you very much, sir. I hope the audience enjoyed this. I hope you did too, Brian.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Kieran.